Hi, my name is Phoebe Wiley, and I decided to do a video recording today for my daughter, Mariah. She's 2, and the reason I decided to do that is because this girl loves listening to my recordings, but she will not sit still when I read to her. So I decided to do this, and I'm going to share it with you guys to share it with your little ones should you choose to. Anyways, the book that I'm reading today, it's based on Malcolm X, and it's called Malcolm X, A Fire Burning Brightly by Walter Dean Myers and Leonard Jenkins. And that's the cover of the book. Whoever heard of a revolution where they lock arms and sing, "We shall overcome"? You don't do that in a revolution. You don't do any singing because you're too busy swinging. You don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. The man talking was Malcolm X. The audience responded with applause and nervous laughter. They believed in his brother, and even though they knew what he was saying was dangerous. Some say that the police were recording everything Malcolm said. Malcolm knew it was true, but he hadn't come this far to turn back or soften his message about winning freedom, justice, and equality for blacks in America. Where he had come from was a small black community in Omaha, Nebraska. He wasn't Malcolm X then, but Malcolm Little, the son of Elder Earl Little and his wife, Louise. Malcolm's earliest memories were of watching his father speak before black audiences in Omaha. Besides being a preacher, his father was also president of the local chapter of the Universal Negro Improvement Association, UNIA, an organization that urged black people to improve themselves by starting their own businesses and educating themselves. But jobs were scarce in Omaha, especially for blacks, and the family moved to East Lansing, Michigan when Malcolm was 4. Young Malcolm admired his father very much, but it was from his mother that he received his love of learning. Louise Little loved to read and spent hours teaching Malcolm and his brothers and sisters how to read and do arithmetic. Up, you mighty race, you can accomplish what you will. Malcolm's father knew that if his children were going to do well, they would have to be good students. They would have to understand their own history. As he struggled to feed and clothe his growing family, he also worked hard to give them a sense of pride, both in themselves and in their race. There were constant threats from people who did not like his talking about supporting black businesses and having black pride. Early one morning in September 1931, the police arrived at the Little house with news that Elder Little had been killed in an accident. He had been found crushed to death under a trolley. Louise Little and her children were devastated. Rumors around town reported that Malcolm's father had been killed by people who didn't like what he had been saying about blacks needing to stand up for their rights. With her husband gone and few jobs available for Black women, Louise Little had a difficult time making ends meet. Malcolm often went to school hungry. As things worsened at home, Malcolm's mother became so ill, she could no longer support the family. Social workers split up the children, placing Malcolm, his younger brothers, and a sister in different foster homes. When Malcolm started playing pranks in class, he was sent to a detention home. Despite the family's troubles, Malcolm kept up his grades and was popular with the other students. He played for the school basketball team and was elected class president in 7th grade. He remembered his father telling him that he could make something of himself. In his heart, he knew that his father had been right. Malcolm knew that he was bright and that he should be able to use his intelligence to make a living. When Malcolm was in junior high school, a conversation his English teacher had a profound impact on him. His teacher asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. Malcolm proudly told him that he wanted to be a lawyer. "We all like you," his teacher told him. "You know that." He went on to say that Malcolm should be realistic about being a Negro. "You're good with your hands. Why don't you plan on carpentry?" he said. Malcolm felt hurt and discouraged. What good did it do to be a good student at school and to get along with all the other kids if he couldn't be what he wanted just because of the color of his skin? Sensing that there was no future for him in Michigan, Malcolm asked his half-sister, Ella, if he could move to her home in Boston, Massachusetts. He left Michigan at the end of the school year. Boston was an exciting place to 14-year-old Malcolm. Young Black men wore zoot suits and had their hair straightened. They had their own way of talking and even a cool way of walking. Maybe Malcolm couldn't be a lawyer, but he could do what the sharp guys did in Boston. He had his reddish hair straightened, and he bought himself a powder blue suit and a wide-brimmed hat. "Man, you're looking good. Just like you should," his friend Shorty would tell him. Malcolm started feeling good about himself again. He liked belonging to the slick crowd in Boston. He worked a number of jobs, including one as a sandwich seller for the railroad on the train route between Boston and New York. In New York's Harlem community, Malcolm became fascinated by the nightclub life, the parties, and the street hustles. Big Red, as he was now called, moved easily in this new and exciting world. It was as if he had become a different person from the one he had been in Michigan. New York was heaven to me, and Harlem was seventh heaven. Malcolm took his sharp suits and snappy hats from New York's hot spots to Boston. In Boston, he joined a gang that robbed apartments. But the sleek life he was leading came to a quick end when his gang was arrested. Malcolm was 21. when he went to prison. He had no one to blame for his troubles but himself, and he knew it. What had happened to the bright boy he had once been? To the teenager who wanted to be a lawyer? Bitter with his surroundings and with himself, Malcolm spent most of his time in Charleston State Prison reading. Books had a lot more to offer a young man with a good mind than the convicts he was with. Anyone who has read a great deal can imagine the new world that reading opened. Writing to his brothers and sisters was one of the few pleasures Malcolm had in jail besides reading books. One letter from his brother Reginald particularly interested him. Reginald had joined the Nation of Islam, a political and religious organization dedicated to the betterment of Black people. The Nation of Islam was headed by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. Malcolm was so inspired by the teachings of the Black Muslims, as they were also called, that he wrote to Elijah Muhammad. He was thrilled when Elijah began corresponding regularly with him. Elijah Muhammad told Malcolm to consider himself not a prisoner, but a man who was about to make a change for the better in his life. At the bottom of the social heap is the Black man in the big city ghetto. He lives night and day with the rats and cockroaches and drowns himself with alcohol to try and forget where and what he is. Elijah Muhammad said, "But when you get him, you've got the best kind of Muslim. He's the most fearless. He will stand the longest." Malcolm was ready to make that change. In August 1952, when he was paroled from prison, Malcolm Little had become a member of the Nation of Islam. Having gone from the good student in Omaha to the big city hustler, Malcolm had now taken on a new identity. Like many Black Muslims, he dropped his family name and took the last name X. He said that represented his lost African name. The Nation of Islam believed in Black people helping themselves, as Malcolm's father had believed, but also in separating Black and white people. Malcolm was a passionate speaker, and he was so successful at recruiting new members that Elijah Muhammad sent him to build up the Nation of Islam Mosque in Harlem. It was a natural place for Malcolm to be. He knew the streets. He knew the street life and language of the people he was seeking to convert. In his own way, Malcolm was following in his father's footsteps. In New York, Malcolm met Sister Betty X. Eventually, they would marry and have 4 daughters. The white man wants Black men to stay immoral, unclean, and ignorant. As long as we stay in these conditions, we will keep on begging him, and he will control us. He never can win freedom and justice and equality until we are doing something for ourselves. During the 1950s, Malcolm X could often be seen speaking on street corners in Harlem. This was a turbulent time in America. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown versus Board of Education that segregation in schools was wrong. This ruling helped fuel the civil rights movement, which worked towards securing equal rights for Black Americans. The leaders in the movement had different ideas about how to accomplish their goals. One group believed that Black people should appeal to Americans for equal rights and demonstrate their determination to get those rights by peaceful protests. It supported moderate, well-educated men such as the Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., who preached nonviolence. For positions of Malcolm X appealed, for positions of leadership, but it seemed to ignore the kind of urban street people to whom Malcolm X appealed. Other groups in the civil rights movement, such as the Nation of Islam, believed that Black people should demand equal rights and be willing to fight for them if necessary. Malcolm was a fiery speaker with a growing following. As the civil rights movement grew larger and larger, Malcolm began making a name for himself at home and abroad with the intention of seeking greater publicity for the Nation of Islam. Malcolm preached that Black men should not drink, smoke, use drugs, steal, or commit other crimes. He used his own story to show how he had turned his life around. Malcolm also preached that Black people should separate from whites. Malcolm was labeled a bigot and a troublemaker by some white and Black people. Even more alarming to some people was Malcolm's rejection to nonviolence. Malcolm preached that Blacks should demand justice using arms if necessary. Elijah Muhammad began to feel that Malcolm's outspokenness was making the Nation of Islam look bad. You don't have a peaceful revolution. As violence against Blacks increased in the 1960s, Malcolm's speeches became more heated. Although Malcolm was enormously popular, Elijah Muhammad told him that he needed permission before he could issue any more public statements. A rift was growing between Elijah Muhammad and his most popular minister. Malcolm was frustrated because he felt that the Nation of Islam's policy of non-involvement wasn't in keeping with the times. Malcolm, who had changed so much in his life, was about to make one more change. In March 1964, Malcolm announced that he was leaving the Nation of Islam. He wanted to start a new organization that would include Black men of all religions, and that would be an even more active force for change. 2 months later, Malcolm made a religious pilgrimage to Mecca, the holiest city in the Islamic religion. In Mecca, Malcolm experienced a sense of unity with the other pilgrims who were of all colors. For the first time, Malcolm's outlook no longer included rejecting others because of their color. True Islam doesn't have room for racism, he said, because people of all colors and races who accept its religious principles can accept each other as brothers and sisters. Malcolm's new flexibility pleased a lot of moderates in the Black community. More and more people were looking for new leadership in the battle for civil rights by no longer rejecting people because of their color. Malcolm and his message had become much more acceptable. Others felt they no longer knew what Malcolm stood for. The break with the Nation of Islam had not been held. On a cold day in February 1965, at the age of 39, Malcolm was giving a speech in Harlem's Audubon Ballroom. The speech had just started when suddenly gunfire erupted. There were wild moments of confusion as people ran toward the exits. But one thing was soon clear. Malcolm X lay dying on the floor. 3 members of the Nation of Islam were later convicted of his murder. Malcolm X was a complex man living in a complex time of turmoil and change. He had blazed his way through the history of the 50s and 60s in America. And like so many flames, he warmed many with his leadership and insight. Others he burned with his opposition and scorn. And like flames that burned too brightly, his light was too soon extinguished. To come right down to it, if I take the kind of things in which I believe, then add to that the kind of temperament that I have, plus the 100% dedication I have to whatever I believe in. These are ingredients which these are ingredients which make it just about impossible for me to die of old age. That's what Malcolm said. To come right down to it, if I take the kind of things in which I believe, then add to that kind of temperament that I have, plus the 100% dedication I have to whatever I believe in, these are ingredients which make it just about impossible for me to die of old age. Malcolm knew that he wasn't going to die old because there were going to be people that were going to try to kill him because of what he believed in and what kind of change he was trying to make in his life and to the people of the Black community. I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you.